Good morning. The title of this sermon is A When You Lie Down and When You Rise, Faith. In February, we lost our Chihuahua, Priscilla. We were really connected to Priscilla, and her passing was really hard. Priscilla was an amazingly intuitive and loving dog. Priscilla would come and find if someone was sick, she would just know it, and she'd want to snuggle with that person. She just knew what was needed and did it day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year for 15 years. About a month before Priscilla passed, we got Pearl. This is Pearl. Pearl, named by our granddaughter, Sophia. We got on Craigslist for $250. That was a pretty good buy. So she is a Craigslist dog. In the 8 months since her arrival, she has completed puppyhood and is now pretty much full grown, weighing in at 8.5 pounds, which may seem small to most of you, but Pearl weighs twice what Priscilla weighed. Now, Pearl is extremely well known to our Sunday school families because of her numerous talking dog videos telling about children's activity packets. She says she's not going to talk in this video, however. And yet, as impressive as Pearl's talking abilities, the most amazing thing about Pearl is how quickly she has developed the same loving, intuitive connection with Sonia and T and I that Priscilla had. If Sonia or T or I are feeling a little under the weather, Pearl will find her way onto our lap. She's an incredible, loving, and loyal four-footed member of our family. Now, Pearl, like the rest of us in the family, isn't perfect. She sometimes chews things that she shouldn't, including 2 of my nighttime plastic mouth guards, which I found when cleaning up her you-know-what in the backyard. So not perfect, and yet amazingly loyal and loving and relational with Sonia and with T and with me. And yet what really blows me away is that most dogs are like Priscilla and Pearl. Most dogs not perfectly trained by Westminster Dog Show technical sense, but in a loyal and loving and relational sense, they are transformed into these incredible, faithful members of our family. In fact, one of my favorite bumper stickers of all time is this, and I think it applies to Pearl. I want to be the person my dog thinks I am. We'll leave dog training for a moment, but we will return. Last week we looked at the 10 Commandments. In case you missed it, I have included the color-coded graphic which breaks down the 10 Commandments into 3 different categories. It's on the PDF that is attached. However, Jeremy's on vacation this week and he normally can put these things in, but I'm going to hold it up and just kind of walk through it really quickly. So the 10 Commandments is really broken up into 3 different types of commandments or groupings of commandments. The top 3 in blue, no other gods, not to worship idols or false gods, and don't take the Lord's name in vain. You look to the right, pretty small print, but it says relationship with God. That the first 3 commandments deal with drawing us into communion with God. Now drop down to the last 5. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet your neighbor's property. These last 5 all refer to our relationship with others, or community, or strong families, or strong marriages. How we are able to be in relationship with one another. And then the 2 in the middle, honor the Sabbath, take time set aside to think about reading the scriptures, focusing on what it's all about, worshiping God, and honor your father and mother. Yeah. Be willing to receive from the previous generation or your parents and grandparents. Those 2 commandments have the word mechanism next to them because those are the mechanisms, the essential mechanisms that allow these words, these commandments to move from simply words on paper into our lives, into our hearts, into our being. Without those mechanisms, without those means, it doesn't work. Now, the 10 Commandments appears twice in Torah, in the law, which makes up the first 5 books of the Bible that are the center of Judaism. both now and equally during the time of Jesus. Following the second telling of the Ten Commandments in the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy, in the very next chapter, the 6th chapter, is the passage we're focusing on today. Now, the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy, the Ten Commandments, obviously is very, very, very well known. However, the 6th chapter is equally well known. And that is because it is the words, or it forms the words, of the most prayed prayer in all of Judaism. It is called the Shema. And Shema is the Hebrew word for listen or hear. And it begins like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Keep these words that I am reciting you today in your heart. Recite them to your children, and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorpost of your house and your gates. The Shema is the prayer that every Jew is to pray twice a day, in the evening and in the morning. Now, the Shema has had different versions at different times. It started off, actually initially, just with those words, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But in a relatively short time, additional words were added. And the most significant addition was the very next part of it, where it says, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And to keep these words that I am commanding you this day. And then it tells us where we are to keep them, in your hearts. Recite them, and it tells us to who? To your children you recite them. And talk about them where and when, at home, and when you are away, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Now, interesting, it seems a little strange to us to say, do something when you lie down and when you rise. We generally say that when we wake up and we go to bed. But for Jews, the day goes a little bit differently. For the Jewish day begins and ends at sundown. So that is why they say, first when you lie down, and second when you rise. By the way, that was free. The Shema emerged in the 300 years leading up to the time of Jesus. This was an incredibly fertile time for the Jewish faith. In some ways, it was the biggest renaissance of Judaism that Judaism had ever known, maybe at all times. The written Torah was becoming more widely available. And believe it or not, the experience of the exile to Babylon, where the people were torn from the land and taken to Babylon, actually strengthened the faith enormously. An active tradition of faith was emerging, and the Shema was very much at the center of it. And the Shema was not a Sabbath-only prayer. It was a prayer that was prayed twice a day. Right after a person recited and prayed the Ten Commandments, and the two were very much connected. The Shema emphasizing that there is just one God and that we are to love that one God with our whole being. And it was seen as a short description of the purpose of the Ten Commandments is to be connected with God, to be in a loving relationship, our whole being, our heart, soul, mind, and strength, being in communion with God. And the Shema prayer makes it absolutely clear that we are to bring them into our hearts, the center of our being, and actively engage with them, not just weekly on the Sabbath, but every day, at both the beginning and the end of the day. And this twice-a-day act of faith that included daily reciting and teaching children to that which allowed the faith to move from stone tablets or the printed word into our hearts and into our lives. And this really seemed to happen during that 300-year period leading up to the time of Jesus. In Romans 5, Paul writes that Jesus came at just the right time. And I believe that part of what that means is that Jesus came when the Jewish faith had matured to a place where it could receive God's gift to us of Christ. 100 years earlier, or 100 years later, and the conditions were very, very different, not nearly as fertile. Part of that great fertility within Judaism came as a result of the Shema and the great Jewish rabbi or teacher Hillel, who lived just before Jesus' public ministry. Hillel died when Jesus would have been a teenager. Hillel's influence was profound. He's considered the greatest teacher in all of Judaism. Some say he was second only after Moses. Judaism a whole, and seemingly Jesus directly, were affected by Hillel. Hillel, for example, developed the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, which Jesus placed at the center of the Sermon on the Mount. Yet perhaps most significant was that Hillel contributed his understanding of the Shema, which Jesus affirmed in the Gospels. In some ways, you get the Hillel version of the Shema. To the part of the Shema prayer in Deuteronomy 6:5, to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, Hillel added one other verse from Torah. Leviticus 19:18, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then Hillel said that these two verses comprise two things. First, they embody the entire Ten Commandments, our connection with God and our connection with one another. Second, they embody the essence of all 603 commandments in the Torah. Hillel Ashkel's words were that all the other commandments were commentary on these two commandments: to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And guess how many times Jesus either quotes or affirms Hillel's version of the Shema in the Gospels? Not once, not twice, but 3 times. I'm not going to read all 3. They are Mark 12, 28 to 31, and Luke 10, 26 to 28, and then Matthew 22, 34 to 40. I will read the Matthew version. This also forms our call to worship. You'll see this connection. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer of the law, of the Torah, asked Jesus a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? Jesus said to him, Shema, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus said pretty much the very words that Hillel said. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and all the prophets. So 3 times Jesus takes the Shema and brings it to the very center and talks about it being the essence of what it's all about. So Jesus takes the Hillel version of the Shema and makes it the center of our faith, the summary of the 10 Commandments and the essence of the entire Torah. What Jesus is doing is really twofold. First, he is identifying himself as being in alignment with the rabbinic Judaism Hillel. Second, he is affirming the practice of the Shema prayer, something that is done not 2 or 3 times a year, or not once a week on the Sabbath, not once a day. No, Jesus is taking the faith and putting it in a form that would remind everyone who heard it that this is something that you make a part of your life when you wake up and when you go to bed. That you would recite it to your children. That you would literally wear it on your body and take it into your heart. These 2 commandments, to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, was to be carried into your heart, carried into your being. Back to our faithful Chihuahua Pearl, and more broadly, dogs in general. How did Pearl get to be such a great dog? How did it happen so quickly and thoroughly? What was the mechanism? It's pretty darn simple. So simple that it happens in millions and millions of homes around the world. The answer, there is a daily dimension to the transformation of a puppy coming into this world like a baby does, knowing nothing, literally a blank slate, and becoming transformed into a loving, loyal, and intuitive member of the family. Do you think Pearl, or any dog for that matter, would have undergone the same transformation if she lived in a kennel, and neither Sonia nor T or I had daily connection with her except once a week, when we came and cleaned her kennel and put down a week's supply of food and water, followed by 1 hour of training. Would that transformation have taken place as it did? I don't think so. In fact, I know so, and so do you. One of my favorite professors at Asbury Seminary, when I was there in the 1990s, was Robert Mulholland. His classes were, they were kind of like a worship service, just this deep sense of God's presence, and he was just filled with this wonderful, loving, gentle spirit. Robert Mulholland, here's a picture of him, and his best-known work was called Shaped by the Word. And what Shaped by the Word is about how spiritual formation happens. How do our lives become shaped by God's Word? How do our lives become shaped by the faith, shaped by religion? How does that work? How does that really work? And how does that work in the way that is in alignment with Jesus? That was his quest. That was his lifelong quest. Again, this is in the PDF, but maybe you can see it, but I'll kind of run through. He says basically there's really two types of religion. One type of religion focuses on information. The job is to get the information to us, or for us to access that information. An information approach to religion or to faith works like this. The object is the scriptural text. In our case, it would be the Bible. The goal is correct information. We got to get the correct information. It's all about being right. We seek to do what? To master the text. And it's kind of like a problem to be solved. And finally, what happens to us in the process? What's our orientation? It's to be analytical and to be judging, right? To be able to discern and to be able to make correct judgments. That's he called an informational approach to the faith. But Robert Mulholland would talk about a Shema understanding of the faith, a Hillel understanding of the faith, a Jesus understanding of the faith, which is not so much an informational understanding, but rather he called it a formation. You could also use the word transformational understanding. The object is us. We're the ones that we focus on being changed. The goal is personal transformation, or being conformed into the image of Christ. Being faithful, that's the goal. Not being right, but being faithful. There's a difference. What we seek is to allow the text to master us, not the other way around. Our goal is communion with God and one another. And finally, the orientation. Our demeanor is one of humility and introspection, or self-awareness. And when formation or transformation becomes the focus of the Christian faith, it becomes much more like what has taken place with Pearl over the last 8 months. Now, please don't depart thinking that Pastor Dave preached on that we're all like dogs and that Christianity is for the dogs. No, becoming a person who is in loving communion with God and with one another is a bit more complex and involved than a dog's life. But in Jesus explicitly embracing the Shema as he does, not once, not twice, but 3 times, I don't think it's mere coincidence that he is pointing to a faith, a power that makes our faith a multiple time a day type of transformation. That nurturing our relationship with God and nurturing our relationship with others cannot just be something that we focus on once a week or a few times a year and then just expect that sort of transformation to happen. No, it takes kind of what Pearl experienced, that sort of ongoing process of nurturing, sometimes some correction, sometimes some focusing on praise and affirmation. That's the sort of process, that's the sort of thing that molds a dog. And in some ways, that's the way we are molded and shaped as well. The key is we have to find the mechanisms that work for us. Mechanisms, or to use the words of John Messley, the means of grace that allow us to be transformed, our real lives to be changed. Now, you know how the term organized religion has become a less than positive term, with more and more people saying that they are spiritual, not religious. I think that what people are uncomfortable with is, to quote Robert Mulholland, that informational-centered Christianity, on knowing the right answer, on being 100% right sort of faith. And what people are yearning for is a formational or transformational-centered Christianity that is less concerned about being right and more concerned about being faithful. A faith that is less interested in analyzing and judging and more interested in us becoming humble and self-aware. A faith that really does focus on loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. When organized Christianity, and in some ways the organized is not a bad word, to seriously organize and order our lives so that we find those things, those means, not those 3 times a year thing, not those once a week things, but those ongoing things that allow us to be in tune, to be connected with God. For some people, it's praying the Lord's Prayer, maybe once or even twice a day. For some people, it's opening up the Bible and reading a passage each and every morning. For some people, it's listening to Christian music. For other people, it's fasting on a regular basis. For still others, it's maybe sometimes called like a faith connection with someone else that you connect with on a regular basis and find out how they're doing in their walk with Christ and let them know how you're doing in your walk with Christ. There are infinite number of means of grace, of mechanisms. But what the Shema would suggest is that this needs to be an ongoing part of our lives. In the same way that pearl is molded and shaped numerous times throughout the day, we need that type of shaping as well. In other words, how can our faith become more like the way we love our dogs into the amazing family members they become? The truth is, we just need to let go of the stuff that gets in the way and be willing to find and embrace the stuff that we know is filled with the Spirit of God that was revealed so beautifully in the person of Jesus. Amen.